Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and the co-host of the podcast Fear and Greed Business News. As always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner and founder of Sugar Mama TV, the financial literacy platform covering Instagram, books, podcasts, YouTube, Threads, TikTok, all social media platforms. Hello, Canna.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm going well, thank you. I'm intrigued by today's topic, and I'm actually surprised we haven't done it yet because it is one of the big questions when it comes to property investing, because obviously housing prices are still so high, and that's not just in our capital cities. This is kind of over the last few years we've seen dramatic gains pretty much everywhere across the country. So it's little wonder, I suppose, that people are looking for different ways to get their foot onto the property ladder, and one of those is buying a place with somebody that you know, whether it is a friend or a family member or, I don't know, a colleague or anyone really. So today I want to find out from you whether it is a good idea, how it all works, kind of some of the risks, I suppose, because I imagine there would be a few of them, some of the benefits as well. We'll just kind of pick it to pieces. This whole topic will jump in. But before we do, know that as you're listening, anything we talk about is always general in nature. It is never personal, investment, strategic, or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only.
Exactly.
So buying with somebody else, have you seen it happening, buying with a sibling or a friend or more than one friend, even
Colleagues?
a group? Yeah.
Yes, I have. Probably the most common dynamic that I see is adults and parents, I should say, and adult children, where they come together to buy a property.
That's an interesting one. I don't know why I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, absolutely. It would be the case where you have adults, older parents who might have a bit more money and are able to assist.
Well, it's actually not so much more of an assistance thing. It's not like lending them money or going guarantor. They actually will go together as, buying the property together as a team.
Okay.
So a classic example is, some parents, maybe empty nesters, you could call them. They're mortgage free. They've got some money, set aside, and they want to, invest. So they will join forces with their adult children and buy property together. That's the dynamic I've seen quite often.
Okay. And so then otherwise you would have perhaps siblings doing it, or you might have just friends kind of coming together, or colleagues, I suppose colleagues who are also friends, which is possible. The benefits, let's just kind of go through why people would consider doing it. The obvious one, I suppose, is affordability.
Exactly. You can get your foot in the door and foot in the door sooner, because I think a lot of people out there are looking at, the property market and how quickly it's rising. And, most people can't save at the speed that it's growing. So it allows you to just get in there sooner rather than later. Then, of course, when you combine forces, you've got greater borrowing power. So it's also easier to service because you're not taking out one massive mortgage. You're splitting it, across two people, sometimes more. And if you haven't had enough time to save up a big enough deposit, this is also a great solution. And you get to share those ongoing expenses, because we all know that when you buy property, you've got to start paying the council rates, the water. If it's an apartment, you've got to pay strata and so forth. So it's a way of helping manage those ongoing expenses. And another one that a lot of people don't really think about is diversification. And this is where I've seen adult children and their parents combine forces, is because they want to, own a couple of properties in a couple of different suburbs. And obviously diversification helps reduce your risk. So instead of having to wait longer to save up a bigger deposit, or everyone has a common goal of wanting to diversify, this is a great strategy to allow this to actually happen.
Okay. And it's something I'm assuming that you can get advice on, that a financial planner would be able to advise you on. And certainly we always encourage that if this is something that you think, hey, maybe this will work for us, get some advice.
See a financial planner, but also see an accountant as well, because there may be certain ways of structuring it, particularly if you've got one partner that's on a lower income, at a lower tax rate, or it's depending if it's negatively geared, it may be better off in the other person's name. You need to speak to an accountant, a financial planner, and a lawyer.
Okay, I'll get to some of that later because there's a lot of kind of considerations that you need to do in terms of the agreement that you might have in place and whether kind of one person's going to be buying a larger share of a property and all of these kinds of things. And also then what happens kind of when you sell the shared property and kind of preparing kind of for what happens further down the track. And it's good to discuss all of that up front. But we talked about the benefits just there. What about the risks? This is probably an obscure risk to start with, but your risk to your own kind of credit history and your credit check?
Absolutely. I mean, you're borrowing money with someone else, so you're equally responsible for that loan. So there are lots of risks involved. So doing this with someone that you trust is essential. And making sure that there is, communication, open communication, transparency, and as we sort of touched on, that legal agreement. But you've really also got to understand, why are you doing this? What is the objective behind this? And are those goals in alignment to each other? Because, I talked about the benefits of doing this, but there's also the emotional benefits. And, for some people don't necessarily want to go and buy a property, but they know that they have to because they are, renting and they've had to move out of their rental property multiple times. It's been disruptive to the family, or where they live, there is no rental, so their only option is to buy. So you've got to sort of make it very clear and transparent as to what your, motivation behind doing this is, whoever you decide to join forces with.
How does a bank look at it? Are you responsible just for your share of it? And when they're assessing your ability to do this, in the lender's eyes, are you responsible for the whole mortgage, or do they actually look at it as kind of, say it's a 50-50 split? Are you being assessed and held responsible just for your half? This is probably quite a technical question.
You're responsible for the joint loan. So that responsibility is shared equally. So if your partner in crime doesn't pay their mortgage repayment, you've got to cover them. Otherwise, your credit rating is in serious jeopardy.
Okay. So it is clearly something then, though, that a lot of people this is not an uncommon thing to see people going into these arrangements, whether it's siblings or whether it's friends or whether it's parents with their adult children. It is clearly a well-established path to home ownership.
Absolutely. And it's something I would even consider, further down the track with my children potentially if this is something that they wanted to do.
Does it tend to be more for property investment instead of somewhere to an owner-occupier kind of situation?
So interesting you say that. So I know one particular situation where the parents wanted to diversify, and they also they had some money sitting aside that they wanted to obviously get a better return than they were getting on as cash. So this was a way of actually making tax-free money because, it became their adult children's principal place of residence. And they did certain things to the property to add value, and they actually sold it at a fantastic profit, and that it was all tax-free money. So for that particular situation, they did it with the intention of making money. So it was very much investment driven. And it was also done in a legally tax-effective way.
But it also gave the adult children a place to live.
And they were also covering those ongoing expenses and contributed towards the renovation costs because it was a partnership. So they split the money, and that allowed those adult children to go into another property with a much bigger deposit and a much smaller mortgage. So it's definitely, I would say, with the right mix and the right level of experience, doing this can be a fantastic opportunity to make some money. And so there is a bit of a mix going on. So particularly though for people who can't rent because there is nothing available, or there's nothing that's actually consistent and reliable from a long-term rental point of view. There are people who are doing it purely for emotional benefits. And we all know that obviously your home is a sense of stability and security and safety, so there you can't push to the side those emotional benefits.
All right. Look, there's a fair bit to cover then in terms of kind of what you need to discuss before you jump into this, because this is a massive, massive commitment that you are making with somebody else, because we're talking about often a loan for kind of 25, 30 years. So it is something that you don't kind of enter into it lightly. We might take a quick break and come back and look at some of those elements of it in terms of the agreement that you might need to have in place and how you actually plan for the end of the partnership in that property, whether the property is sold, whether one of you kind of takes it over. There's a lot to discuss. We'll do that in a sec. Canna, we're talking about investing in property or buying property with other people, so with family and friends, and whether it is an effective way of kind of getting your foot in the door and getting another foot. I'm assuming not the same one that's in the door, but getting a foot then onto the ladder, which is an odd kind of image. If you've got one foot in the property, in the door, and one foot on a property ladder, it's kind of like a property style game of Twister.
Snakes and ladders.
Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just an interesting little image. Assuming you're going to buy a place with somebody else, how do you do it in a way that does reduce the risk, if the risk can be reduced? Is it, I suppose, a co-ownership agreement beyond? Obviously, you have a contract for purchasing the property and both of your names will be on there. Let's just say you're buying it with person X, your friend Robbo, who is obviously a good mate you've been friends with for some time, and Canna and Robbo are buying this place together. Do you have a co-ownership agreement that sits alongside the contract?
Absolutely. You have to have a legally binding co-ownership agreement in place, and you both must get independent legal advice. And that is where the value of a really good lawyer comes in, because they can play devil's advocate and throw a whole pile of dynamics and what ifs to say, well, what would happen if you can't sell the property because there's a strata issue and there's a large strata bill attached. So who's going to pay that, and what proportion are you going to pay it? And what if one person can't afford to pay it? How do you sell it? And what if you can't sell it because there's serious damage to the building and it's going to be sold at a significantly less price than what you paid for it? Okay. How does that get handled? So they'll be able to map something out that will hopefully foresee any potential risks, so that there is a proactive strategy in place that you can refer to should things go wrong.
So really that agreement needs to account for a whole bunch of different scenarios.
Lots and lots of different things, because this is a big purchase. It's buying property is one of the biggest items you will ever buy in your life. So, and it's expensive. You've got to pay stamp duty. It's not like you can take it back and get a refund. So, well, you can, but it's very expensive with stamp duty and agents' fees and marketing and so forth. So you need to make sure you really think this through. And you take into consideration, what if this person that I'm essentially going into business with here, what if they lose their job and they, can't pay the mortgage? Or what if they get sick and they can't work and so they can't pay the bills? So do they have income protection? Yeah. Or maybe I need to take insurance on that particular person. What if that person gets sued? Does that then mean they're entitled to part of that property as well, their share? What if that person goes on maternity leave for a period of time? And yes, they can hold the property, but only for a limited period of time because of their budget being adjusted. There's a lot of things that need to happen. And then, of course, what if the relationship breaks down between the two people? Yeah. And what if there's issues around selling? One person wants to sell, the other person doesn't. How do you agree on that sale price? Well, yeah,
let's jump straight to the end here. Now, that would be something that you need to sit down and discuss what the goal is, isn't it? Because if you were buying it as a shared place for you and Robbo to live in, and you are, okay, we're going to live in this, but after 10 years, we're going to start renting it out, or after 10 years, we're going to sell it. You actually need to know what the end goal here is, isn't it? Or we're going to just keep it forever and we'll use it as an investment into the future. But at some point, someone is probably going to say, hey, we should sell this place.
Exactly. And that's what I said to you about sort of that transparency and importance of communication. Yep. Making sure that you communicate what your objective is and being really transparent when things change. Because you can plan your life out as much as you can and, with as much detail, but the reality of life, things happen, things change. You have children, you want to move overseas, something might, unforeseeable, touch wood, might happen to you, and you actually may need that money. So this is why you've got to have a detailed exit strategy in place, and you've also got to have valuation methods. So if we want to sell our half to that other person, how do we work out the valuation? Because you only really know the true value of your property when you go to sell. So how will this be valued if it's actually not being put on the market? Do you take the average of 3 independent real estate agents' valuations, or do you look at RP data, and how far back do you go to look at that valuation? There's so much to consider.
And should you be putting this in the co-ownership agreement?
100%. You want it to be detailed so that if there are any dramas, you've got something in black and white that you can refer to, that you can hold someone legally accountable to.
So it's like a property prenup, really, isn't it? It's kind of it's beginning with the end in mind.
Exactly. And the other thing that a lot of people don't think about when they do this, and I'd say probably, especially if you're doing this for the first time, is you've got to remember the bank can't split the security. So if one person banks with XYZ and the other person banks with ABC, you can't have two banks having loans on that one property. So if someone has the intention to maybe diversify and, they buy a property with someone and they got their foot in the door on the ladder.
Mm-hmm. Yep, both feet, different directions.
And they want to, buy another property and then, well, look, I've held this property for 5 years. I've got great equity, even though I own 50% of that. I'd like to go and buy another property. This is where the issue comes in, because the bank XYZ might have security on that. So you would then almost committed to borrowing money from that bank to buy the next property, which may not actually be the best thing for you. Their interest rate may not be as competitive as your bank ABC. So there are some limitations that you need to be aware of, because the bank XYZ technically have the security on that property.
Who's the best person to talk you through those limitations? Is that a financial planner? Is it an accountant? Is it a lawyer, or a combination of all three?
A combination of all three plus a mortgage broker. And again, you need an experienced mortgage broker. This is so important, because not only will they get you a great deal, but they'll also give you some really good guidance and resources to make sure that everything's considered. And particularly when you have an experienced mortgage broker, they would have seen this go wrong. So they will be able to advise you and guide you as to what works.
Yeah. Okay. It doesn't need to be 50-50, does it?
No,
you can structure it however you want. It can be kind of a 20-80 split or whatever.
Absolutely. And this is why, you have to speak to a lawyer whether agree whether it's going to be tenants in common, which is where you split your proportions, or whether you go with a joint tenancy where you're equally responsible.
I'm furiously taking notes here. Tenants in common or joint tenancy?
Most people are joint tenancy, particularly when you're buying as a couple, or, because you are equally responsible for it. Whereas that tenants in common, you can actually say, all right, I own 33.33%.
Okay. And it's different scenarios then for if someone was to die. It actually plays out differently. When I was doing a little bit of reading up on this, that really kind of, depending on which option you choose, the consequences can be really quite significant.
Exactly. And you see this often with businesses who don't have sort of estate planning and considerations in place, or insurances like buy-sell agreements, where they'll end up in, basically owning that property with whoever has inherited that property, and they may not particularly like that person.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, everything can just go a little bit haywire.
Yeah, things can go sour.
Wow. This has been a really interesting episode. And I know I have to say that because I'm here and I'm part of it, but I've actually found this really interesting.
I feel like not enough people talk about this, and I think it is a great way of potentially, when I've seen it done, I've seen it work really well, but only on a short-term basis. I've never seen this actually work long-term, because people end up changing.
Yep.
People need the money, situations evolve, people want to do different things, they want to take the money and invest it in something else. But from a short-term strategy, I have seen it work, and I have seen it work very, very well, and I've seen people do extremely well financially out of this.
It does feel like a short-term strategy, that it is a case of using this to get your foot in the door. And from then on, as long as you've kind of planned out how that's going to work, you can kind of, both parties can end up using that as their springboard. God, we've got a lot of metaphors today, kind of feet on ladders and indoors and springboards and kind of things, everything just going all over the place. So you've seen it happening a bit. It's kind of obviously with kind of adult children and their parents, but there's a whole lot of combinations. It can be siblings, it can be friends, it can be kind of colleagues, it can basically be anyone. The important thing is that you get advice from a whole bunch of people, that you would need a lawyer involved, you need an accountant involved, you can kind of get advice from a financial planner, mortgage broker. All of these people are able to advise you on the process that's involved here. There are benefits to it in terms of the affordability side of it, that you can get in faster, you've got greater borrowing power, you can share the ongoing expenses, and that it does, for people who want diversification and want to perhaps own multiple properties, it allows them potentially to do that in different locations because they're not having to foot the bill for the entire property. So that's a whole bunch of different benefits, but there are risks as well. Whenever there's benefits, there's obviously going to be risks, and you are going into business essentially with somebody else, and that you are equally responsible for that property and for paying that mortgage, and that there's all kinds of things that can go wrong if you don't do that. And one person might be very diligent, one person might be great and very responsible, and the other person may not be, and they should be listening to this podcast, and they could learn quite a few things. And that if you're going to do it, that you need to get an agreement in place, a co-ownership agreement, before you do it, with independent legal advice that kind of goes through the proportion of ownership. Whether it's kind of 50-50, and then kind of what happens at the end, what happens, who's responsible for what expenses, and what happens later. When you're going to sell the property, what are the triggers for this? And if one person wants out, because that's actually something that we didn't kind of go into a huge amount of detail, that if one person just wants out entirely, that there's options for that other person to take over the full kind of mortgage.
Exactly. But they may need time to do that. They may say, well, hang on, you caught me out by surprise. I need 3 months to quickly save up some money so I can, apply to the bank and have all my loan documents in place and be able to do that. So that's why I say that transparency, that communication is so important.
Yeah, so that you know kind of where you are going to go, and that this agreement will plan for a whole lot of different circumstances that may see the end of that partnership, but at least you're prepared for a whole bunch of different things to happen. All right, well, we must finish things up today, Canna, with a savings hack. A little bit of savings advice, a tip. And I'm going to continue, if I may. I know that you're just itching to use one of your own savings hacks, but I love how angry this is making you. That a few weeks back, I put the call out to your Instagram followers to, hey, follow me, Michael Thompson Author, and give me the savings hacks that you would otherwise give Canna. And goodness me, you have responded, and this is fantastic. This one came from, maybe Demi or Demi. I don't know pronunciations, and it always worries me. But she says, hi, Michael. I just wanted to say how much I enjoy listening to your podcast, and a savings hack that I use, that if you get fuel from Woolworths petrol stations and you're an Origin Energy customer, you can get 8 cents off per litre. So you have a 4 cents Woolworths fuel voucher, 4 cents Origin Energy voucher, and if you buy your milk in the same transaction, because you know how you got to spend above $5 or something, you get another 4 cents off. You can actually save 12 cents off per litre. By combining all of these things. And so I suppose it's a really good tip, but it's also just an idea to go and look at some of these other little perks that kind of energy providers, all your kind of utilities and things, and like your NRMA and your RACV and your RACQ and all of these different kind of things. They often have these little bonuses, little kind of tips and things that you check out their website and you can see these other little savings that you can just add in. And here, she's combine them all and she's got 12 cents off per litre.
That's so good. Well, I'm with Origin Energy, so I will be doing that. Thank you very much, Demi. Demi. Whoever you are out there, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I have written back to her, obviously, and thanked her profusely for choosing me over you, Canna.
She'll come back, don't worry. They always do.
I don't know whether they will. I think they've experienced now my gratitude. They want to keep feeding me more savings tips because they like to see me win, which is very nice. All right, how do we find you?
Best place to get in contact with me to send me through your savings hacks is, of course, Sugar Mama TV on Instagram.
And you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed, the business news podcast for people who make their own decisions. Thank you very much for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember to hit follow on the podcast. Please leave us a 5-star rating. We very much appreciate those. Next week, we are going to be talking about FIRE, a bit of a guide to the financial independence, retire early movement, and really with the target of retiring by 50, which might be entirely unrealistic. I don't know. And you're kind of looking at me as though you are...
I've got some really good numbers. You're going to be blown away.
Okay, I look forward to this. Join us next week and we'll be collectively blown away.